Good yontif, everyone. Last month, there was an article in the New York Times called, "Is Resilience Overrated?" And in that article, Jamie Attenberg interviewed resilient people who had survived Hurricane Katrina. If you'll recall, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated and really leveled whole parts of New Orleans. And people often marvel at those folks and say, "You're so resilient." And Attenberg interviewed many residents there and asked them how they respond when people say, "You are so resilient." He said often that is met with what he calls fiery resistance. Now, why is there fiery resistance? One woman was quoted as saying, "Well, that really means that the onus of responsibility is on us to fix the problems here and not on civic responsibility beyond us." Another woman was quoted as saying, "When somebody says you're so resilient, that's really code for you're on your own, sorry." You see, people in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina realized that sometimes life is so overwhelming, things can be so bad, and they're simply not willing to be in denial anymore. They're just not willing to be there on any level. You know, we Americans like to celebrate ourselves, our good old American pluck and maverick spirit. We like to think about how there is nothing that we can't overcome, that God doesn't give us more than we can handle. We celebrate how we Americans are the people who can lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Of course, that's a myth. The truth is, life is sometimes overwhelming. Sometimes bad things happen, and sometimes many bad things happen all at once, and it can become more than we can handle. We Jews suffer from the same problem. We love to extol ourselves. What a brilliant history we have. We have survived so many thousands of years, and we're doing great. We're still here. We are the miracle people. We love to celebrate how we always come out on top. We are always the best and the brightest and the smartest, and we make the desert bloom and all of these wonderful ideas. But of course, that's also mythology. The truth is, we don't always succeed. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we're not the best and the brightest. Sometimes life overwhelms us, even us, the Jewish people. In this year, 2020, it's like we're all going through now Hurricane Katrina on so many levels. And I think none of us really have a taste of being in denial anymore. We're not interested anymore because we simply can't be. Too many bad things have been happening, one after the other after the other. We had a good run, didn't we? We could say that it's been almost a generation where we could almost convince ourselves that some of the horrors of the 20th century were in the past. Those things we would have liked to believe they were mostly over. We would have liked to believe that most of us can live, thank God, in safety and in prosperity. And we've come to see that that's a myth as well. We're living in a reality that includes a pandemic. We're living in a reality that includes authoritarian people who want to grab power and leadership in our society and undermine our democracy. We're living in a time of rising anti-Semitism and the ascendancy of many types of human cruelty in our society. It's a sobering reality. But I promise I'm not going to leave you here. In fact, what I want to do this evening is show us a new kind of path forward. What I hope to do tonight is to give us a message that is even, in a sense, better than hope. What I hope to do tonight is to give us the eyes to see and the hearts to feel relief and even the possibility of redemption right in the middle of all of the troubles and difficulties that we may know. On Rosh Hashanah, I talked about the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. If you'll recall, the story goes that Jacob was about to meet up with his dreaded brother Esau after 21 years of separation. His brother Esau was his mortal enemy. He was sure that Esau was going to murder him and kill all his family the next morning. And in the dark of night, Jacob wrestled with this mysterious, shadowy angel all night long until the dawn was about to break. And the angel wants to leave, and Jacob says, "No, I won't let you go until you bless me." So the angel says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Yisrael, for you have struggled with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed." And then Jacob says, "Tell me your name." And the angel responds and says, "Lama zatishal lishmi? Why would you want to know my name?" And then the angel leaves, and Jacob is wounded. He limps off into the dawn, but he blesses the place, according to the simple reading of the story. He blesses the place, and he calls it Peniel, because he saw Elohim panim el panim, because he saw God face to face. V'tnatzelet nafshi, and my life was spared. It's quite a powerful story. Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Shapira was the rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto during the Shoah, one of the darkest moments in Jewish history. And he commented on this story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. And in his reading of the story, he saw a deep concern as he looked around at all of the evils around him of his time. He saw how anti-Semitism is something that seems to come again and again and again throughout our history. For thousands of years, it keeps returning. And he saw in this story a promise of something extraordinarily hopeful. He said, Jacob said to himself, "Will this same pattern occur to my children? Will it happen that after enduring troubles and mishaps, their salvation will be limited to the fact that their enemies will not overcome them, that they will not fall into their enemies' hands, but will return to the situation of living among enemies, which prevailed before the crisis? This can't be. Rather, I will not let you go until you bless me means, after the sufferings are over, God must liberate my descendants decisively, not just remove them from their immediate crisis." In other words, what is Rabbi Shapira saying here? He is saying that yes, there is this constant recurring cycle of anti-Semitism that comes back again and again and again through history. And yes, there is this profound concern that Jacob has of his descendants, that his children and their children's children will be constantly re-traumatized again and again and again. So what is happening at that moment, at the end of that wrestling match, when the angel blesses him? The angel is saying, your name is Yisrael. You will prevail. You will, in the end, overcome this hatred, these horrors that seem to be recurring in history. They will end. There is a way out. This beautifully hopeful message is all the more poignant when we think about how Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Shapiro and so many around him were wiped out, murdered by the Nazis. And so we have to ask ourselves, how is it that he was able to have such an incredibly hopeful and beautiful message right there in the midst of the horrors of the Warsaw Ghetto? And for that, we have to go deeper into that story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. So indeed, Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And so what does the angel say back? The angel says, what is your name? It's a very interesting and strange question for the angel to ask Jacob. He's an angel, of course. He knows what Jacob's name is. But of course, it's setting up the bestowing of a blessing by giving a new name. And that's a very powerful thing that happens throughout the Torah. To get a new name is for God to bestow upon you your destiny. Not only your destiny, but the destiny of your children, your divine purpose in the world. And that destiny is to become Yisrael, which is the people who will prevail, who will overcome these dark times. And with that, the angel is gone, and Jacob limps off into the dawn. But we have to go a little deeper. I want to take us even deeper into this story for us to get the message that we need right here in our world in the year 2020, moving into 5781. And that's this. There's actually two namings that happen in this story, right? You have the angel naming Jacob, calling him Yisrael, and then Jacob ends up also he names the place Peniel, the face of God. A double naming ceremony is happening right here. And here's my chiddush on this. I don't think that Jacob just named the place Peniel. I think what he was doing was he was actually blessing the angel and naming the angel Peniel at that moment. I'll explain what I mean. Why does Jacob then say back to the angel, "Tell me your name"? And the angel says, "Lama zatisha lishmi? Why are you asking me my name?" What's going on in that moment? Well, think about what an angel is. An angel is not like a person. An angel actually represents a manifestation of God in a moment in space-time, as where God is an actor in the world. We call that an angel in Judaism. So in a sense, Jacob was wrestling with an angel, and he's got that angel in a chokehold right at that moment. But really, he's got God in a chokehold in that moment. And he says, "I won't let you go until you bless me, until you give me the name." And then he names, what does it say? It says something very powerful. It says, "Vayikrat Shem HaMakom Peniel." He calls the name of the Makom. Makom, by the way, means place, but it's also a name of God. He's naming Makom, God in that moment, Peniel, the face of God. At that experience, he's naming it. So what do we see here? We see two namings. The angel, or God, blesses Jacob by naming him Yisrael, and you have Jacob blessing the angel, or God, back as Peniel, because his life was spared. So what does all of this mean? It means something quite mind-blowing. It means this moment isn't just extraordinary because Jacob got his new name of Yisrael. In some ways, it's even more extraordinary that Jacob was able to bless that angel of that experience. Because this wasn't just any angel. This wasn't like a happy angel. This wasn't like one of those babies with wings or with harps that we see in paintings. This was a nightmare angel in the dark of night that he was wrestling with. This angel encapsulated all of his worst fears and terrors of his own annihilation, as well as everything that he was running away from. That angel was really more like a demon than an angel. And what did Jacob do that night? Instead of running away from the angel, he blessed him. It says, "Ve'ivarech oto sham." And I read that line as referring to Jacob blessing the angel. He blessed him there. He blessed the place where he was there. That's the power of this moment. He blessed the nightmare. And then Jacob, in that sense, becomes the typology for the role of the Jewish people through all of our trials and tribulations, through all of the centuries. No matter what happens, we are the people who find blessing in all things. Now, I'm not saying that we should be blessing Nazis or child abusers or terrorists. Of course not. What I'm saying is a teaching that applies to the radically subjective experience of our lives and our worlds. What we as the Jewish people are called to do is to shift our spiritual gaze at life and look through the eyes of Jacob in that dark night when he was willing to bless the angel with whom he struggled. One of the central pieces of the High Holy Day liturgy is the Unetana Tokef. That's the place where we say, who shall live and who shall die, who by fire, who by plague. It's the place where we confront this powerful metaphor of who's going to get written in the book of life for another year. An awesome moment of the High Holy Days. And then there's this fascinating refrain that I want to focus on today. And that refrain goes like this: Uteshuvah, utefillah, utzedakah ma'avirin et roa hagzeira. That tshuva, returning, tefillah, prayer, and tzedakah, ma'avirin et roa, literally removes the evil of the decree. That's a radical assertion. What does it mean? It means that there's a way to shift our spiritual gaze at life, to look at the worst thing that could be happening imaginable, and to see past our ideas of evil, and to simply see it for what it is. Again, I'm not talking about not looking at Nazis and not seeing the evil. Of course, you always see the evil in Nazis. I'm talking about, again, our radically personal, subjective experience of how we orient ourselves to life, to look at what is and to see it for what it is. That is what we really mean in Judaism by teshuvah. Teshuvah doesn't just mean repentance. Teshuvah is the act, just like Jacob, of being willing to turn around and face your demons, to face the thing that is the most terrifying, the thing you don't want to face, to have the courage to look at it face to face. Teshuvah. And then there's tefillah. What is the essence of tefillah in Judaism? Tefillah, it's brachot, it's blessing. Just like Jacob did with that angel, right? It's to find somehow, some way, the capacity to find blessing in it. And then, and only then, are we able to enter into a relationship of tzedakah with what is, with pursuing righteousness and justice. And yes, it means even bringing Nazis or whoever else to justice, but we don't have to be suffering in our hearts over evil. That's ma'avirin et roa hagzeira, taking away the evil of the decree. There's another piece of liturgy that we read tonight. Ki hine kachomer biyad hayotzer. We are like clay in the hands of the potter. That's a powerful metaphor for life so often, especially in this past year. What does a potter do with clay? He pummels the clay. He beats the clay. He is constantly twisting it into different shapes and spinning it round and round and round. That's how certainly I felt a lot this year, and I'm sure that's how you felt this year as well, over and over again. That's a metaphor for how we sometimes can't imagine why God is doing this to us. But then there's a refrain in that piyut, in that liturgical poem. It says, La brit habeit ve'al teifen la yetzer. Look to the covenant and don't turn to the yetzer, to bitterness, to anger, to darkness. Look to the brit, to the covenant. What does that mean? Well, a covenant, of course, is God's promise to us that we will be God's people. In a sense, that's the promise inherent in the name Yisrael. You were going to overcome this. Brit also really means relationship. It's the relationship between humanity and the divine. La brit habeit, therefore, is another way of saying is, look, even as you're feeling like that clay being pummeled, look for the face of God right in the midst of that. La brit habeit. Look for it. And don't give in to bitterness. Look for the blessing right in the middle of it. Of course, the $64,000 question is, how on earth would we do that? How would we do that? Look around at the world. How do you see blessing when you see images of children in cages, when you see authoritarians trying to undermine our democracy, when you see racism on the rise, when you see anti-Semitism on the rise in this world? How do you see the blessing in that? So in order for us to do that, I want you to join with me here for a moment. I want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine, you can even close your eyes if it works for you. Imagine that you are Jacob on that night of that wrestling match. You are fighting all night. You are struggling and fighting and fighting and struggling with this darkness, this dark angel. And you look at that angel as you struggle. That angel contains everything in your life that has caused you pain and suffering and loss and anguish. Everything up till now and everything that is happening to you right now, that angel is there and you are struggling and wrestling with it. And you say, I will not let you go until you bless me. And what do you mean when you say that? It's a way of saying, when are you going to finally stop tormenting me? When are you going to finally stop torturing me? And then that angel looks up at you and says, but you've already won. Your name isn't Jacob, it's Yisrael. You've already won. In other words, you've been struggling with me your whole life, and look at you. You're still here. Yeah, you're wounded, but you're still here. You're still alive. You're going to be able to greet another day. Jacob at that moment had an epiphany that is open to every single one of us. He realized that everything that he had been through, all of the demons he had been running away from, all of the struggles, all of the terrors, all of the suffering and loss and pain, all of it was not in vain. It was not meaningless. In his ability to face it, finally, the blessing becomes complete in his life. Finally, in facing it, he's able to see the whole face of God, the darkness together with the light. That's what tshuva really means, folks. Tshuva is the ability to turn and face life, and ma'avirin et roa hagezera, and in that courage to turn and face it, the evil drops away, and there is simply what is. No more are we plagued by the evil. We simply have life and the infinite possibility to find blessing. That's another way of saying this is the way out by never more being a victim. No matter what happens in your life, no matter what's happening in the world around us, we, the Jewish people, are not ever destined to be victims. There is always the possibility to learn, to grow, to heal, and to be present and of service to all others who are struggling until they too can wake up to what tshuva really, really means. I want to come back to those survivors of Hurricane Katrina, the ones who resent being told that they are resilient. You know, it's not that those people aren't resilient. Most of them, I would say, are incredibly resilient. And if you ask them the question differently, if you ask them to say, how has this experience changed you? A lot of them are going to talk about their lives and you'll see how resilient they actually are. The problem arises if you hold resilience out as a kind of value out there in the world, as a kind of expectation to hold over you, or even as an excuse, as they have said, for others not to help you out. The problem with calling somebody resilient is that if you really believe you're supposed to be resilient, then when life bowls you over, that leaves you all the more isolated and despairing. No, resilience is not something that we can strive for. Resilience instead is the effect of a life well lived, a life where we profoundly engage with whatever arises with our hearts wide open to what is. Even when we feel like we are clay in the hands of the potter being pummeled and beaten, true resilience emerges when we learn that it is our role to move with that change as God changes the shape of the vessel that we are, to move as that change. Because when we do that, then we're just living our lives the best we can engaging with our fullest hearts. And on the outside, it looks like we're being very resilient. The truth is, we're just doing the best we can. So in this year, 5781, may we all learn from the example of Jacob, who became Yisrael because he was willing to face the darkness and his fears and the worst nightmare, and to find blessing in it. May we too find the blessing in it, and even more importantly, look for the possibility of blessing that emerges from it. Because when we do that, then truly we become a blessing. And may we indeed be that blessing for ourselves and for all our loved ones, for this whole nation, for all the Jewish people, and for all the world. And let us all say, Amen.